Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're conducting our Labor Day review of American labor history, the part of American history that those Austrians, those foreigners, that foreign body of subversive, poisonous foreign doctrine, and those Chicago stooges of Austria have not told you about. And remember, your standard of living, the conditions of your life would be inconceivable without mass struggle by the labor movement. Don't kid yourself. You wouldn't be getting what you're worth. You get what you can obtain through power relations, and that includes political and mass organizing power relations. The existence of the American middle class, inconceivable without the labor movement, even though the success has never been what we wanted. So the AFL, American Federation of Labor, starts off as the craft unions, the skilled trades, the aristocracy of labor in 1881 in Pittsburgh. And their program is they want the 8-hour day and the 6-day week. They are not political, like the British unions, the French in particular, the Germans. No, this is Gompers, Samuel Gompers from the cigar makers, aristocracy of labor. His big thing is reward your friends, punish your enemies. He uses the sympathy strike. He uses secondary boycotts and things like this. But any kind of organization is better than none, even fragmented. So pretty soon the Carpenters Union gets the 8-hour day. Skilled workers, once again. They're trying to fight for the closed shop, meaning that you can't be hired unless you're already a member of the union. And they want to fight against the Yellow Dog contract. The Yellow Dog contract says, I'll be hired, but I promise I'll never join a union. So by 1914, the AFL has 2 million members among skilled workers. The problem is that that's a small minority of industrial workers. So we needed industrial unionism, and you're going to have to wait for the 1930s to get it. However, there are some successes. Homestead Steel Strike, 1892. This is Henry Clay Frick, and he goes with a lockout. He says, I'm not waiting for you guys to strike. I'm kicking you out. I'm not going to let you work. What he wants to do, he's got some new machinery that he brought in. And he says, I'm going to cut your piecework rate so you earn the same amount as you did before because I don't want to pay. To enforce the lockout, he brings in Pinkerton detectives, a private army. Notice, neo-feudalism is never far below the surface. When you have powerful private interests, when you have Wall Street bankers and large private industrialists, the impulse to set up private armies and to go into the neo-feudal rebellion business, always there. So he brings in the Pinkertons, the Blackwater of the time, right, the DynCorp or whatever it is. The Pinkertons, however, are no match for the strikers. The Pinkertons are surrounded, they're captured, they're disarmed, they're held for a while, and then they're driven out of town on the rail. And the only thing that saves Henry Clay Frick is the usual anarchist provocateur. Alexander Berkman, anarchist, tries to take a few pot shots at Frick. That turns public sympathy in favor of Frick. The strike is defeated. Then we have the Pullman strike, right? Now, these are these sleeping cars. George Pullman. This guy practices paternalism, right? He's got company towns, but he's offering somewhat decent wages. Paternalism you don't see very much today. It's mainly just wage gouging and union busting. But along comes Eugene V. Debs of the American Railway Union. And in 1894, because of the Barings crisis and the Latin American debt crisis of the city of London, the Depression comes over into the United States. Now, Grover Cleveland, the Wall Street Democrat par excellence, is the president of the U.S. So Pullman fires 1/3 of his workers, and he demands 40% wage cuts for everybody else, in honor of the fact that London had collapsed after Barings had blown the first time. Get the idea, right? They want you to pay for the crisis. They always want you to pay, not them, the ones who created it. So that becomes a general railway strike in 1894 with secondary boycotts and sympathy strikes and so forth. Once again, everything from Cincinnati to San Francisco is shut down. No cars roll. And at this point, Grover Cleveland, of course, tries to adhere to the Jeffersonian theory of the enumerated powers that we hear so much of today. So what are you going to do? Where's your enumerated power to send federal troops to break a strike, Grover Cleveland, Wall Street puppet? The state legislature of Illinois, in particular, where the rail hub is not in session. Governor Altgeld, that we've just heard about, is still in office, and he won't call them in. So how do you justify using federal troops to break the strike? Because that's what he wants to do. He says, I'm doing it to assure that the U.S. mail will get through. How about that? So they'll always find a technicality, these strict constitutionalists, of course. But when they need to find a detail to break a strike, then, of course, they'll find that detail. So that's really a pretty much nationwide railway general strike in 1894. And remember, this is when Cleveland also sells out the public finances of the U.S. government to J.P. Morgan. Now, in this strike, we get a couple of things. The use of the injunction. You could not get a jury to convict people for having a strike in many places. But what you can do is you go to a federal judge and you get an injunction demanding that the workers go back to work. And then if they defy that, which is what they're going to do, then you put them in jail. And that's what happens to Eugene V. Debs. There's an attempt to brand unions as conspiracies in restraint of trade. This is helped along by the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Sherman Antitrust says that conspiracy in restraint of trade is a federal crime, and you can be charged triple damages and so forth. So, ironically, the federal courts under Cleveland don't enforce the antitrust aspects against monopolies, trusts, and cartels, but they find a way to enforce it against labor. And what they say is, you are a conspiracy in restraint of trade. And that goes on until the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914, which is rather more favorable to labor. Labor is not a commodity, we learn in 1914 with Clayton Antitrust. Labor, not a commodity. You can't be prosecuted under the antitrust laws. There are limits to injunctions. You can do a multi-state boycott, but essentially then, once the reactionary Republicans come back, once we get Harding and Coolidge and Hoover, and we hear from Glenn Beck his great love for Coolidge, the Republicans are trying to bring back Coolidge. Well, the federal courts in the 1920s essentially ignored the law. They didn't just interpret the law. They trampled on the law. They ignored it. They pretended it wasn't there. So many other labor struggles. The Cripple Creek strike in the 1890s. Colorado and Idaho mine workers, imagine this, in a place like Idaho today, which is considered to be a Republican fiefdom. They were militant miners who were fighting for their rights. And in Colorado, too, Governor David Waite of Colorado stands out as somebody who was at least not a rabid union buster on the lines of so many other governors, right, the Christies of the time. So during the Woodrow Wilson administration, bad news in general, but there is Clayton Antitrust, so that goes through. You've also got during these years the rise of the Wobblies, the international workers of the world, mainly in the Pacific Northwest. And here again the idea, one big union. There's also interesting thing. We, of course, have the Anglo-Saxon common law in the United States. That's, life, liberty, and property is defined to include a whole range of things which are not spelled out, which come from the Anglo-Saxon common law. So there are aspects of the common law which can be used in favor of labor, and we'll get to those in just a second.